All right. All right, we're good?
Yep, we're good. So you proposed the debate. I know I challenged you here. Did you have something prepared you wanted to start with? You want me to go ahead and take it?
I guess I'll start off. I know I asked you to set it up. I just have no idea how to set the debate up, so I asked you to go ahead and do that. And I
Sure.
believe in order to do so, you have to make a resolution that you're pro in order to set it up. So that's why I'm assuming you did it that way.
Yes.
So I want to start this debate. What really I like to call it a discussion more.
Sure.
My statement, which is my resolution, is that the right to bear arms is an inalienable right. Now, there are a number of ways that you can argue with that. One, you could say that inalienable rights don't exist, period. So therefore, by definition, the right to bear arms is not one of that. It is not an inalienable right. Or you can say that despite the fact that I may agree that such rights exist, I don't hold that the right to bear arms is one of them.
All
So
right.
I don't know from what point really you're arguing with the resolution. Obviously, it's pretty clear that I believe that that inalienable rights do exist, and I believe the right to self-preservation, which would be the right to keep and bear arms, should be one of those rights. So I guess you can let me know exactly what part you disagree on, because that would really change. Would really direct where this conversation is going to go.
Sure. I think for the sake of this debate, I'm approaching it from the idea that I'm granting that inalienable rights exist, but I'm going to argue why I don't think the right to bear arms is an inalienable right, because I think it's significantly different from what we would universally consider other inalienable rights.
All right, fair enough. I mean, do you want to give a reason as to why you don't think that it's the same as?
Sure.
So we're in agreement that the right to life, I have a right, an inalienable right for somebody not to shoot me in the head. That we agree exists. Why would my ability to defend myself, should be the right to self-preservation?
Okay. The way I look at it, I think inalienable rights are those rights that we have. That if we were to take them away, we would lose our personhood. For instance, if we were to have our life taken away, we are no longer a person, if that makes sense. If we're, because we'll just be a corpse then. So that's something that we have as living creatures, as people, we have life. And so it's for someone else to take that away, we have a right to it. If someone takes that away, we cease being a person. In the same instance, and if you have any questions about what I'm using to define like a person, I'm just using in the general sense, the accepted sense of personhood. When you take away somebody's liberty, when you enslave them, or you limit their ability to achieve their goals or pursue their happiness, then you're taking away their personhood. So I'm going to argue that true inalienable rights are something that individuals have within them, that if you're taken away from the outside, then you lose your chance to be a person. You lose your personhood. I don't think that the right to bear arms actually falls under that, because if someone disallows you from having, say, a particular type of arms, or even if you were to blanket say that government disallows you from having any weapons at all, you don't actually lose your personhood. Maybe it makes it more difficult for you to be a person, but that's not eliminated. I mean, if no one around you has weapons either, then you're not going to be in fear of having to danger. So I don't think it qualifies in the same way that if someone were to take your life, you lose your personhood. If someone were to enslave you, you lose your personhood. If someone were to limit your ability to speak, or try to influence the way that you think, like we are free to think, we have I would not say it's an inalienable right for us to have unlimited free speech. It is an inalienable right to have, maybe we could argue for a limited type of free speech. But for you to think thoughts, if someone were to come in and influence you to think in a certain way, by chemicals, by torture, however you want to do it, that takes away your personhood. And so that would be breaking your inalienable rights. And I think that's different than someone coming in and taking away your property, taking away your your guns or your arms. So, like, I would also go so far as to say the right to own property is not an inalienable right, though it is a right that's granted by our Constitution. Any questions about what do you
Yes,
think about that?
a number of questions. One, would somebody taking away my life not the biggest knock against my personhood?
I mean, someone taking your life would be your biggest knock against your personhood.
So shouldn't, by definition, my ability to stop said person be an inalienable right?
I'm not sure that the right to defense is going to be an inalienable right.
I'm just asking a question based on your own logic. Why would it not be?
Well, because in order to you would be encroaching. I guess I'm saying any action you take against them would be against their
Against their right.
Their right. Yeah. So I think that you can have rights that's you're not allowed to do this to another person. So you're infringing on their rights. So that person has rights. So when you're talking about inalienable rights, it's not for the individual, it's for the person that's acting against them that has the consideration. So I would not be concerned so much with my own rights. If I'm the only person in the world, I can do whatever I want. So when it comes to talking about inalienable rights, I'm talking about the rights that I believe you as a person have. So it would not be within my right to infringe upon your life, if that makes sense.
Right. No. So this is something that Aquinas addresses when he speaks about the natural law, which are natural rights, which is really what inalienable rights are.
Sure.
And when he speaks about it, he addresses that, and he makes it very, very clear that we will go against some individuals' rights for the rights of the common good of humanity as a whole. And he makes that very clear, and he says it's not contradictory. That is the right way to do it. Where that's one thing. One is an individual's right versus the common good, and plus he explains as well, and I believe it's Locke also goes into it, that the value of somebody who is the offender, somebody who's coming to attack me, and me who is the innocent victim, that my rights but far supersede the rights of the attacker. So it's not really a question on the premise saying that natural rights can exist, that I can't have a right to defend myself because by doing so I'm violating the rights of somebody else. The answer is yes, I am, but I am allowed to do that. That is the correct moral and the natural thing to do for two things. One, for society as a whole, and two, because I'm the one that is defending myself, and I'm not the one that's perpetrating this onto another.
Well, I think Aquinas looks at that as just if that's an explanation of his use. I mean, he just has it backwards. I mean, if you want to say that you could use any of the arguments where you sacrifice an individual for the common good, no one is going to argue that sacrificing one individual to save 5 individuals is the right thing to do. You would not, and we know that it's not the right thing to do, because even under saying for the common good, or if you're going to try to do something for the society, we know that sacrificing an individual that's healthy, we know that infringing upon their inalienable right to life is wrong. I mean, you would agree with that, I assume. That if you have 6 ailing people and you wouldn't kill one person to save those 6 people, because what you're doing is you're breaking that person's inalienable right. And so you can almost go and say that if we as a society are willing to kill this one person to save the other 6, then the society that we have that is willing and able to do that isn't worth saving. That's the position that I would take. So that would be my response. That would be my response to that. Now, the response to the idea that if someone is trying to come and attack me and breaking my inalienable right, that's fine. So if someone's trying to kill you, do you have the right to kill them? I mean, you may be justified in that, but if within your own society, or you may feel, oh, this person was trying to kill me, but so I was justified in infringing upon his rights. But you don't assume that you're not infringing upon that person's right to life. You accept that's what you're doing, that what you're doing is a negative and that it is wrong. Now, what they were doing is a negative and is wrong. So you're basically arguing that what I'm doing is less wrong than what he was doing, but there's no idea that's saying, oh, this person is trying to kill me, so I'm going to try to kill them. And when I kill them, what I did is somehow a good. No, it's not a good. It's still a bad. You infringed on their right to life. So that would be my response to that argument, is that we recognize that the greater good is not good enough to sacrifice or to break into person's inalienable rights. And we also know that when, even in defense of ourselves or in someone else, that when we do something, we are doing a negative, and we just justify it by saying, well, they were going to do it to me. Well, I'm not sure that if someone's going to do something bad to you, you doing the bad thing to them makes you doing the bad thing a good thing. It does, in my opinion, it doesn't.
Well, that's a conversation that we can have, whether when somebody's attacking me and my right to self-defense, but so killing them being a result of that, whether that now turns into something good or does it still remain bad but yet justified. That's a conversation we can have, but either road you choose, the outcome still remains that I did have the right to do that. That's the right of self-preservation. That's the right of life. So whether you say that now that based on Aquinas that now becomes a good action, or that still remains bad yet justified, either way, it doesn't take away from the fact that I had a right of self-preservation. And I think it's a very logical conclusion. Let me ask, I mean, if somebody was coming to kill you, do you have a right to kill them?
I mean, I have that right in our country, that what I would be doing would be morally wrong. But
no, say no country. There no countries exist. Say we live in a world that no countries exist.
Okay. I mean, I would defend myself.
Every man for himself. And you believe you did the right thing. You made the right choice.
I would believe that I made, and I guess, a justified choice, not a right choice.
Right meaning not the wrong choice. I mean, you have two options.
It gets to me, it would get into the idea. So what if this person is coming to just beat me up and I kill them? Is that a justified action? If I could have defended myself in another way, if I'm able to retreat as opposed to fight back, it's all tied into other rights that I don't think are inalienable. Like if someone is going to come in and you're protecting your property, well, you don't have necessarily an inalienable right to own that property. So you're perfectly justified and within your rights, and your rights aren't infringed if you abandon the property and give it to someone. Now, that's not necessarily what happens. That wouldn't be the best thing. That's why we have society and rules. And when we don't have to worry about someone bigger than us coming and taking our property. So if the argument is if I have no other choice and the person is coming to me, that I have the right to defend myself, at what point am I no longer defending myself, and am I then injuring and killing that person? Where's the line?
So obviously, if let's first go on to where I believe we would share common ground, and
Sure.
From there we can try to find where, even if we do lose common ground, we would both agree that if you know definitively that the person is not going to kill you, that retaliating by killing the person is unjust, immoral, and a violation of that person's natural right.
Sure. I mean,
right?
I think that's reasonable.
Reasonable. We both have share common ground on that. I believe we both share common ground that if you know definitively that the person's end result is to kill you, that you have a right to instigate and kill that person first, as a right of self-preservation.
I would say there comes a point of,
if you know definitively.
If someone says I'm going to kill you in 5 years definitively, and then I kill them right then, I would not be justified there. There would have to be a point, I think, where
that's not definitively. I mean, you don't know for sure just because somebody said he's going to do something.
Right. So you would have to have a point where you have enough information. They're coming at you. It's imminent. So there would have to be an imminency to the
Correct.
threat. So I could accept that. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, where it does get rocky, obviously, and there are people that are going to make bad judgment calls, is in the heat of the moment. Somebody's
Okay.
batting you, smashing over the head with the bat, or somebody's running after you with a gun. It could be he's just trying to intimidate you. It could be not. But every philosopher would agree that your right of self-preservation does take precedence at that moment where the threat is imminent, where the likelihood is there, where the chance is there, where you feel that it is coming on. Somebody's chasing, for instance, a good example. Somebody's running after you with a gun,
Okay.
right? Pointed at you, screaming, "I'm going to kill you," and you have the ability, whether you're armed or with any ability you have, to neutralize this person and eliminate the threat. That the right thing to do. When I say right, you have a right to do, as far as your right of self-preservation, which is the right of life, to go ahead and kill this person first.
Okay.
So based on that, now let's move that over to the Second Amendment.
Okay.
The Second Amendment, and also we're only so far into one part, as in the Second Amendment of me being right of self-preservation of the threat from my fellow man. There's a second part, which is me protecting myself from a usurpacious government, a tyrannical government, which we know has been the case in history. And it is also us being able to protect ourselves from something like that. So the same way that I think we'd agree that there are times where I do have a right to self-defense. Now, I know you mentioned at the beginning of the debate that if we were living in a society where nobody had guns, where it was illegal and nobody had any, that would be a different discussion as well. As far as the tyrannical government, it would not. For instance, I don't believe that anybody in the 13th century had a right to a gun. Nobody else had a gun. And which is why I know people make the argument that, hey, if you have a right to a gun, how come you have no right to a submarine? Because nobody else has a submarine. It should be a level playing field. So if we lived in a society, we lived in a country, in a place where nobody had any guns, none of the bad guys had guns, then I could hear that argument. Besides for the tyrannical government, that's a separate argument on this argument. But fact of the matter is, we don't live in such a society. We live in a society where gun ownership amongst people that commit criminals, is rampant. We're talking about in the hundreds of millions. So to now say that I don't have the right to protect myself, I'm not trying to see where the logical consistency is if you do agree that I would have a right in circumstances to protect myself.
Okay. I just want to make a distinction. So you're not saying that we simply have the right to bear arms, a right that's granted by our Constitution. You're saying that we have an inalienable right, a right that cannot be taken from, that should not be taken from us to bear arms. And by arms specifically, do you mean guns, or do you mean any type of arms at all, or do you mean arms comparable to what? So, I mean, I guess my argument is that when you say you have the inalienable right to bear arms and you want to keep a level playing field, at what point is level playing field? I mean, to say that a tyrannical government, you're going to have the same equipment as a tyrannical government in the modern age, that's lunacy. I mean, you're never going to have a Tomahawk missile. You're never going to have an Apache helicopter. You're never going to have, I don't know, a smart bomb that they can fire from 50 miles away and blow up your entire village or your entire street. I mean, there's no way that you're going to have a way to combat a tyrannical government in the modern age. So if you make the argument that the reason that we have an inalienable right to bear arms is to protect ourselves from a tyrannical government, that is impractical and impossible to do. There's no matter how well an individual, a civilian, thinks that they're going to be armed and they can stand up against an army, when they can drop a bomb from you from 10 miles in the sky from an airplane, and there's nothing you can do about that. And that's something that we can do. That's something that no one is going to argue that the United States military has the ability to do. I mean, I don't know if 10 miles is high for an airplane. I don't know.
Neither do I.
but my point is,
yeah.
You cannot be armed enough in the modern age to defend against a tyrannical government. So then, from your argument, I'm seeing is that you want to have the inalienable right to be just as armed as your neighbor, or as who you might have a local skirmish with, some individual. So you're saying that a civilian not part of the government. You want to be just as armed as your neighbor. Where if your neighbor doesn't have, if no one in your street has a gun, so then are you going to be able to say that I have an inalienable right to have a gun, even though no one in my immediate vicinity does? I mean, your right can't change based on the environment that you're in. So otherwise, it wouldn't be inalienable. I mean, someone's right to not have their life taken away doesn't matter or doesn't change depending on which environment that they're in. So if your right changes depending on your environment, then it's not going to be inalienable. It's not going to be innate. It's going to be something that's granted, and granted on conditions of where you live, conditions on practicality, conditions on training, conditions on, if it makes sense to arm. If the bad guy has an assault rifle, should we give everyone else an assault rifle? Is that going to make things better? Do those people who didn't have the assault rifles, should we give them to them because they have an inalienable right to them? We have a granted right that we're able to go out and purchase them, but should we, if it's inalienable, if they should be as equally armed as their neighbor, should we give them, if they don't have a gun, should we force them to give them a gun? Because it's not something that's innate to us, I don't see how it's inalienable.
All right. So on that, a number of points, and the points you mentioned are very valid points, and that's why, and I'm happy to address them. One, you mentioned as far as should we be armed to the teeth just as much as the government is to stop, again, that our right to self-preservation as far as stopping a tyrannical government, a usurpacious government. The answer to that is, like I mentioned before, we do have a right to have submarines and atomic bombs. But this is where it reaches a point where having that right and exercising that right will cause more damage, cause more harm than it will save. So correct, we do have a right to stop a tyrannical government, so we should have atomic bombs. But one atomic bomb in the hand of one bad person and the entire world is gone. So there's some, people have to sit down and logically come out with at a point, again, where we will all share common ground that nobody should have these weapons because it will cause more harm than good. There will be a greater loss of life, which would lead to a greater infringement on natural rights by us having those weapons than by us not having those weapons. So that, going with the being logically consistent in that, we should not be able to have such weapons. Now, you mentioned again, as far as me having a gun, despite the fact that I may live in a neighborhood that does not that, let's say, gun ownership is illegal, or an estate where gun ownership is almost just about illegal. So you're saying it should not be inalienable if it varies. The answer is it doesn't vary, and it's still inalienable because the threat is always there. Now, the threat may be greater in one place than another, but no place is clear of this threat. There's no community in America, in the world, that you could say it is impossible for a threat to happen where somebody would need to protect his natural right to life and self-preservation. I don't believe there's a single neighbor that you could point to and make that statement. So the right exists. Whether there are neighborhoods where you will need to exercise that right more often than others, but the fact that the threat exists, the right exists, because that's what the threat is for. And like I said again, if you go back to the 13th, 14th century, nobody has a right to a gun, because even if you throw a gun there, everybody has a right to a gun. Obviously not. You have a right to protect yourself from the threats that are out there. But again, I agree that at a certain point, everybody would agree that by exercising those rights, it would do more harm than good, which would cause a bigger infringement on other people's right to life. So therefore, we should not have that.
So I agree with the argument that if you follow the logic from the tyrannical government, that to quote the movie, the only correct move is not to play. So the only correct move is that no one has guns. I mean, that's the only way that makes logical sense. But then you're saying that you also have this inalienable right to protect yourself. Now, I'm not sure is that you can go from the right to protect yourself to your right to cause lethal damage to another individual. So why would you not say more that we have an inalienable right to defense as opposed to an inalienable right to bear arms, or we have an inalienable right to non-lethal force as opposed to an inalienable right to lethal force? It seems to me to say that we have the right to bear arms is not only that we have the right to defend ourselves, but we also have the right to take action against somebody. If we have the right to have deadly weapons, then we have the right to use those deadly weapons. But if we've already agreed that we don't have the right to infringe on somebody else's life, then how does it make sense to then have, we do not have the right to take somebody else's life, but then we also have the inalienable right to have weapons designed specifically to take another person's life? It seems to me that would be contradictory. And if one right is going to contradict another inalienable right, one of them can't be inalienable. So, I mean, it can be granted. It becomes something that we do. It can be something that we agree with. I mean, I agree in principle with the right to people owning arms for many of the same reasons that you've argued, but I do not believe that right is inalienable. I don't believe that's something that we have innately in us. I mean, that would be to say that every human being or every person that's ever lived has the same right to life, has the same right to freedom, has the same right to pursuit of happiness. But you've even said that we've had a different standard for the right to bear arms. When there weren't a certain type of arms, people didn't have rights to them. If someone discovered a new type of weapon that's super powerful, say like the atomic bomb, not everyone has the inalienable right to have an atomic bomb. No one. I wouldn't argue that. I mean, it just seems that once something becomes more destructive, then we don't have the right to use it. So, because it infringes on these other rights that we believe someone has. Does that make sense? That there's a contradiction there. There's a contradiction between accepting that we do not have the right to violate somebody else's life, and we have the right to have weapons designed to kill somebody.
So on that 2 points, the first point is we got to go one step at a time. We can't put the cart before the horse. Okay. We both do. Let's agree that we have a right, a natural right, inalienable right, natural right of self-preservation, of self-defense, to carry a gun, to have a gun, to protect us from those that have guns and unlawful and are looking to do harm. Now, saying that there are some people that are going to use that right for wrong, which is a breach in the right, that you don't have a right, just because you have a gun doesn't give you a right to use it for evil, doesn't give you an inalienable right to kill with it unjustifiably. So two things. So one, just because people are going to abuse this right, that the logical conclusion from that is not to abolish the right, because some people would abuse any right out there. You don't abolish the right just because somebody's going to use it for evil. That wouldn't be the logical conclusion. That's one. And two, we'd really have to get into the numbers now as well. If I were to tell you that guns save more lives than kill, would you throw out that line of argument?
I'm not sure that I would say. It would depend. When you say they save more lives, I guess where I'm going to have to push back and find out what you mean by save more lives is when you're arguing. It seems like your arguing is coming from the right to defense. I don't see how the right to bear an offensive weapon is the right to defense. So if you wanted to say that we had an inalienable right, say, to shields or to a sword that can block another incoming sword, I mean, I could come to an agreement on that. But when you say that I have the right to carry a gun because someone else carries a gun, because if they're shooting at me, then I'm going to defend myself. But my defense is an offensive attack upon that person. The gun itself is not a shield. The gun itself is not protecting me. The only protection that the gun provides is by eliminating the threat. It's not actually a protection. So the same could be said is, do I have an inalienable right to carry a hand grenade? If someone starts shooting at me, I can throw a hand grenade at them. I mean, I don't think anyone would agree that we have inalienable right to an offensive weapon. But if you were to say then that individuals having, if you were to make the argument that individuals just having the gun, when you say that the guns save more lives than they kill, if you're going to, the individual having the presence of the gun in their home deters a certain number of deaths, and that deaths is higher than the gun deaths that would have happened if those individuals didn't have the gun. I mean, I'd have to consider that. I mean, if you're using just the threat of having the weapon as a deterrent, but it seems to me like if you're saying that an individual's life is saved because they use their own gun to kill the attacker, I'm not sure that there's a net gain of loss of life there that would make it, if that would make it beneficial. That makes sense.
Well, again, if you're saying that there's something out there that exists that I can just press a button and anybody who has a gun that's trying to kill me, the gun will just be ineffective and the bullets will just fly out there into the ether, then we can have that discussion, and I may change my position. I mean, I'd have to really sit down and think about it. But fact of the matter is that doesn't exist. Right now, the best defense is offense. That's just fact of the matter. If somebody's coming at me with a gun, my best defense, my best chance of staying alive is to pull out a gun of my own and shoot them first. That's just fact of the matter. So that inherently is that right of self-preservation, the right of self-defense. That is my best defense. That is the only way for me to keep my life going. And me taking away another's life at the expense that the person who's perpetrating, the person who's attacking me, is not really contradictory to this natural inalienable right of life and self-preservation. But what I brought up the line of reason before is, regardless, even if people are getting killed, and people are getting killed illegally and unjustifiably due to the fact that people can have guns. Now, there are a few issues with that. One is we don't know for sure that guns won't exist in the hands of criminal even if they were made illegal. But let's say we live in a society that, again, you could press a button and all guns disappeared. Let's say that even was hypothetically possible. Right now, fact of the matter is, if guns save more lives than are killed by it due to the fact that people can have guns. Let's say the number of people that are killed, I believe, a year for a gun is about 35,000 people that are murdered per year in the U.S. At the hand of a gun. Of those, I believe 22,000 of them roughly are suicide, which those have to be taken out of the equation because there is zero evidence to suggest that somebody who is suicidal committed suicide only because they had a gun and would not have committed suicide without it. So it's merely a tool. You can't really factor that in. So I think you're left really between accidental deaths, which we can count as well. I think you're left with really 12 to 13,000 deaths a year. Now, if I were to tell you hypothetically that guns save 40,000 people a year, I think you'd agree with me that even without my entire line of reasoning before, just based on the sheer numbers, that it's a good thing to have guns. We're saving more lives than are getting taken. Now, how many lives are getting saved? So I'll post the link. I forgot who said it before. It said, really, it's unquantifiable because you can't know how many lives are saved because there are so many lives that are saved that you don't know about. They say the vast majority of lives saved by guns are just by sheer seeing that there's a gun, perpetrator seeing that a person's carrying a gun, and then they didn't carry out the attack. So now you don't know if the result would have been a loss of life, would not have been a loss of life. So those can't really be counted. But of those counted, the lowest estimate is that there are about 60,000 occurrences a year where a gun stopped somebody from doing something evil, up to, I think the number is about 4 million times a year, which that number is retarded. It's based off a small poll, which was then multiplied. But even go with the lowest number of 60,000. Again, we're talking about 12,000 deaths and 60,000 occurrences minimum of where guns were used to stop crime. Now, how many lives would be saved? Again, it's unquantifiable, but nobody can make a statement, a blanket statement, say definitively, guns take more lives than are saved in America. Nobody can make that statement, and I can make a very strong argument that actually the opposite is the case. So even without my reasoning before, guns should be allowed simply based off that logic. But again, going back, that's not that's not a right. That's not a reason for an inalienable right. I was just throwing that out there. But going back to inalienable right, the fact that somebody's going to use this right for bad does not mean that we now abolish this right. It's a natural right that exists.
Okay, all right. I'm gonna approach your argument like this. Let's say that I grant you that our right to self-preservation is an inalienable right. Now, would you then say that if the technology comes about that say the button that disables the guns, or if you can set it up that within your property that no firearms work, would you then no longer have the right to bear arms? Would you then have the right to have the device that disables arms? Because remember, the inalienable right, if I'm granting that, is the right to self-preservation. So you made an excellent point that maybe at this moment in time, the gun is the best weapon that we have because guns exist. Because guns exist, the best weapon against guns is guns. And so we have a right now to have a gun because it's the best weapon against another gun. So, but when another weapon comes up that is better against the gun, say a pure defensive weapon, would we then no longer have the right to bear arms? Would you then say that they would not no longer be our right to bear arms because our true right that I think that you're arguing for, what it seems that you're arguing for, is our right to self-preservation. So when the technology makes it to where our self-preservation, if we have automatic body shields so that bullets no longer are a threat, so everyone just has them installed when they're born and then bullets can't hurt you anymore, so then do you still have a right to bear arms in that case? I mean, it seems that if I can see a situation where your right to self-preservation is going to be upheld, your inalienable right to self-preservation, if we grant that, where then you would not have your right to bear arms, that there would be no need for them, or that you would not be justified in having them, because why would you be justified in having a gun that was completely useless? So if we can say that there are situations where we would no longer have the right to bear arms because we have something else that better suits our self-preservation, then to me that demonstrates that if there's a point where we won't have the ability to have it, or that we can see that there will be no need for us to have that right, then it's not inalienable. There, in the contrary, would be there is no instance where the right to life, the inalienable right to life, would be no longer necessary. There's no instance to say that we will no longer have to worry about somebody's life. I mean, maybe if everyone's immortal all the time, but I don't know how that would. I mean, that can maybe say that then we don't have a right to life if you're immortal. I don't know how that would work. So I'm just saying that if there's a point when, if we're saying that we have guns because of our right to self-preservation, and we want to argue that the right to self-preservation is inalienable, then at this point, the right to bear arms would become dependent upon our technology.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. The inalienable right isn't a right to guns. The inalienable right is a right to self-preservation. Now, if we have a way of us being able to defend our lives and our liberty without the use of a gun, I'm all for it. But don't forget, we also must protect our another inalienable right, which is liberty, which is freedom, which is freedom from a usurpacious government, from a tyrannical government. So if you have a button that can guarantee can stop the somebody that's coming to kill us and take away our life, and also stop a tyrannical usurpator's government. That this magic button, however it works, if it was to exist, would we abolish the Second Amendment? 100%. The second, it's not. Again, the right isn't to guns. The right is to self-preservation. The guns right now is the tool that is used for self-preservation, because that is the only tool around, and those are the tools that we're actually combating against. Those are the tools that are being used to take away our liberty, to take away our life. Also, before I forget, another thing that you mentioned before I forgot to address. You mentioned that for us protecting our liberties against a usurpation of tyrannical government, saying that guns aren't really going to do that much when they have drones, planes, nukes, and they have all that. On that, 2 points. One, we do see, and we have seen over the last number of years, that guerrilla warfare is really effective even against the most powerful of armies, as we've seen in the Middle East. When you're fighting guerrilla warfare, you don't really need submarines and even tanks to combat them. When you look at Iraq and you look at ISIS, they were able to put up some pretty damn good fights, even without having the same level of equipment, simply because they're fighting guerrilla style. So that's one thing. And a second thing is, stopping a tyrannical government doesn't necessarily mean the government's just going to say all out war against the American population. I would look back to Hitler's rise in Germany, where Hitler didn't just wake up and say war against everybody. It was slowly and progressive, and I'm just using Hitler's example. There are a number of examples where slowly they start taking away the weapons, and they start changing laws and start taking away liberties and freedoms, where eventually it turns out to the point where they are in all-out war, so to speak. Now, having a well-regulated armed militia, having 300 million guns, I believe the number is, if not higher, 350 million guns, and many veterans that have these guns, is a very, very good way of stopping a government from starting to become tyrannical. So yes, I agree. If the government waged all-out war, there's not really much that we can do. I mean, but there's nothing you can do to change that. Give us nukes, that's going to be a bigger loss of life, because one nuke in the hand of the wrong person encroaches on far more liberties and freedoms. So I just wanted to point that out, because I forgot to mention that. That was one of the points you mentioned before.
Okay. So we've come, I think, to the agreement that the right to bear arms is not what the inalienable right is. Then it's the right to self-preservation. So if we're saying that the right to self-preservation is unalienable, then we have a granted right now to in this case bear arms, which could change if something better came along. So I think then that the right to bear arms or the right to own guns is not inalienable; it's a granted right. But the right to self-preservation, I will concede, is an inalienable right. I think that makes sense. I want to respond to your point about effective guerrilla warfare. Why do you think guerrilla warfare works? The guerrilla warfare works only because we, as human beings, accept that individuals have a right to life. Guerrilla warfare doesn't work if we didn't believe that individuals have a right to life, because we would just firebomb an entire city and eradicate it if there was some guerrillas in there, or if there was a mountain that we believed, in our case, that a mountain that we thought housed ISIS. If we didn't believe that those individuals had a right to life, we would just bomb the mountain out of existence and those individuals would be dead. So the fact that we don't do that, the fact that a guerrilla warfare works, is only because we have an understanding that an individual has a right to life, that we understand that soldiers are fighting for their cause and that we need that immediacy. So it's because of our inalienable rights that these things like guerrilla warfare or the other that a soldier would be effective in stopping a tyrannical government in the beginning. The only reason that that's true is because the members that make up the government are still human and they still believe that those other individuals have the inalienable rights. If we lose that, then we don't have, there's no guerrilla warfare, because they'll just wipe out a city if they think that we're in it. I mean, if no one cares about who lives or dies, or the people that are in it, or the non-fighters. So inalienable rights are important because they govern our behavior. And I think there's very few. I think I'm going to grant that the right to self-preservation is an inalienable right, but the right to bear arms specifically is not inalienable, because it will change to something that's more preservation based once that technology comes along. I would say that you could make the argument that the right to bear arms is an important argument. I would, because at this point it's the best defense and or offense that we have against guns that exist, or against a tyrannical government. But if in the future guns aren't the best, then our right to them would change, which would mean that they're not it's not an inalienable right to bear arms if it can change over time, would be my argument for that.
All right, so quickly on those points. Correct. If the government is becoming usurpation tyrannical to the point where they don't care to wipe out the entire population, you're right. There's not much you can do. Although I still would point to I mean, you can find there were small groups of Jews during the Second World War that used to hide out in the forest and fight against the Nazis and blow up trains, and it was pretty effective. But I agree, you don't really stand a chance if the government has taken on a stance that they're willing to wipe everybody out. But again, to wrap up, yes, I agree that the specific inalienable right isn't to guns; it's to self-preservation. Right now, our way of self-preservation is guns, thereby giving us an inalienable right to carry a gun at this present time.